Okay, so we're approaching what I call the doldrums part of the project. We just got a lot of parts to cut out, a lot of machining to do, and it's not looking like anything other than just a lot of parts. We just got to persevere. Next, I'm going to do some veneering. Now, you can, if you want, you could just buy already veneered panels and go that way, but there are a couple things that I want to point out anyway. And I am not going to go into the particulars of veneering. I'm not an expert in veneering. I know just enough to get by. So I'm assuming if you're doing some veneering, you know how to do it, or you'll have to go somewhere else and get some good information on it. So you always have the option of just buying, like I said, veneered panels, cutting them up, and making them work. So here we have the drawing. This is the front, the drawers, open space here. That rail is in the back. Now if we turn this around like that, we have the back. This is a panel right here. There's a solid piece of wood right here, but it's attached to the panel and becomes part of the panel. It doesn't have independent mortises and tenons in it. And right here, this is a little piece that I just add on. It's like 1/8 of an inch thick. And the grain is going this way underneath that little wavy piece, and that way going this way. And the grain from here to here is continuous. It matches. So that's one panel. And this is really not, you can't really call it a panel, but it is a veneered piece. And what I have done is I've doubled up 3/4 inch material. This is 1.5 inches thick and veneered. This is a solid right here. And again, it's like the same as we have down here. It's cut out solid and then attached to this, and it becomes part of this. And I treat this as if it were a rail, and it has tenons, floating tenons right here and here. So let's go the same. This is the end panel, and it's the same. All these panels that are exposed have this solid rail down here, and that is attached to the panel, and they're not independent. So go ahead and you can blank out your veneered parts. At this point, you want to leave them a little oversized, because once I get all the parts cut out, then we'll be going back and cutting things to size. So I want to get all these parts cut, set them aside, and then when we have like measurements, we will cut them all at the same time to make sure that we're consistent. So I've got the veneered panels done, and now I'm going to move on to getting the rails that connect to the legs. Now, well, let's come over here and we'll look down on the drawing again, and maybe I can explain a couple things. So here we see this wave rail. That's on the front of the desk. That's a solid piece of wood. When I cut these out on the CNC, these wave rails, I'm going to be removing a lot of material. When I remove all that material, it's more likely for these pieces to move on me. So I want to cut them out last and be able to assemble them fairly soon after I've cut them out. But I can go ahead and cut out all these other rails prior to that. I can cut them to thickness and width, but I want to leave the length to match what comes off the CNC. So we've got, this is a rail in the back where the feet go, a solid rail. There's a rail on the panel on the side here, on here, in the back, and there's a rail up here and one down here. So I can go ahead and cut those out now, and then we'll come back later, like I said, and we'll cut out those wave rails. So I've got my veneered panels laid up. They're not cut to final size yet. I've got my straight rails cut to width and thickness, but not to length. But come on over here and we're going to look straight down on the drawing and I'll explain some more stuff. Okay, this is the back of the desk. This piece right here is this right here, this wave. I guess you call it a rail, but it's a veneered piece and it's going to have a solid down here. And again, this veneer here matches with this veneer here in a straight line, here and here. So what I want to do next is I want to cut this guy out, but I'm not going to cut it out on the CNC. I'm going to make a template from my CNC and cut it out that way with a handheld router. That way I'll have more control over lining this grain up. So to do that, I'm going to make this template, cut it out on the CNC. This red line right here, that represents the extents, the actual length of the piece. So I can set it up there and I can line up. And I have run out here, so I can hit with the bearing, run in and run out. I feel it's a little safer. I like that better. And so while we're cutting out templates, let's look at the front of the desk. Right here, we have these solid wave rails. And now those I'm going to cut out on the CNC, but I'm going to have to put mortises in them. And in order to do that, I'm going to use the multi-router and I'm going to make up these fixtures like this. Here's this piece right here. It's the same one as that. This fixture, it's going to be plywood, 3 ganged up so it's a little wider than the rail. These holes here are to line those up when I gang them up. This goes up on top of the on the bed of the multi-router. This comes down on that, clamps down. Here's where the mortises are. They're parallel with the bed. That's the exact angle that I want that mortise. Same thing on this longer wave rail right here. Only this one is going to be in 2 sections, front section and back section. Same thing with these. If you have some other method of joining those wave rails, that's fine. This is just these fixtures, and on the multi-router is how I'm going to do it. Okay, so we've got our plywood template and fixtures cut out. As you can see, I have trimmed them, cleaned them up. That's the template. There's the fixtures for the multi-router. But again, let's look at the drawing and I'll show you what's next. Okay, this is looking at the front of the desk. Here's our wave rails. That's what we're cutting out next. So solid wave rails, front and back actually. These are going to get cut right to net length, exactly to size off the CNC. These are a couple of the parts we're waiting on, so we can cut other parts all at the same time. This rail down here, the back veneered rail, the back panel, all get cut to the exact length of this rail and this rail. So let's look at the back for a second. Again, wave rail. This wave rail here gets attached to this veneered rail. It's going to come off the CNC a little long. So when we attach that, we can come back, trim here, get a nice clean fit. Over here now, this one is only going to be 1/4 of an inch thick because it's going on a panel. But it's the same thing. It's going to be long, so we can come back and trim it. Now, let's skip ahead in time a little bit. I have cut these out, and don't trim them out of their block yet. Once they come off the CNC, leave them encased here until you actually use them. Then you come out and break each one out individually. I'm hoping that by leaving them encased, that they don't move as much. So once they come off the CNC, leave them like that until you need them one at a time. Now we will go back in time and I will show you cutting them out. So next we're going to work on the wave rails for the back of the desk. I have broken free the wave rail for the veneered rail and also for the veneered panel. And again, we're going to look straight down and I'll explain to you how I'm going to, what I'm doing now. I want to make sure that I've got everything lined up. So what I'm concerned with now is lining up these veneers that are both going the same direction here. That's supposed to be continuous with an interruption with the leg right here. So we have a little forgiveness because of that interruption in the pattern. But essentially what I've done here is I've trimmed this one right to where I want the pattern to begin. And if you can see right here, I put a red line. That tells me I'm going to trim this one down to that point. Now I've also, right here, I marked the leading edge to where this piece is supposed to plant itself. I've marked that same edge on this end. Then I placed this piece up there, drew a line to see if I'm going to hide that seam. And I am. It's right where it's supposed to be. It's just laid out like I did in the drawing. It all worked. One thing you want to make certain though is that you get this pattern oriented correctly. Don't go like that. Then it won't work. So anyway, I've got that one taken care of. This one, this pattern is going to go on top of here. This is the one that cuts it flush. And this guy goes up there like that after it's cut flush and gets planted on there. So I want to come back again and take a look to see if indeed my wave rails flow like they do in the drawing. That's just kind of a second check anyway. Okay, so what I'm going to do from here on is I'm going to cut this guy out with this pattern, flushing the pattern to the top, leaving a little bit out here to trim off. Later we're going to plant this guy on here and then cut it to length at the same time. We have a good flush fit there on the ends. Before you glue this guy on, you want to sand this up to 320, this up to 320, ease these edges 3/32. And the same thing with this panel here. Sand it up to 320, trim this top edge, line this guy up with these marks on the side. These will be erased at that point. Then sand this guy up 320, ease the edges 3/32, plant him on there. So let's get to that. So we have 3 veneered panels that surround the drawers. We've been working on this one, which is the back. We have 2 outside ones, left and right. And now's the time, they're all the same length. So now's the time to sand these guys up, cut them to length only. We're going to cut the width later, just to length. Sand them up to 320 with the length cut. And the solid edging that gets attached to the bottom, sand it to 320, round the edge over here, 3/32, and attach them to the panels. So let's get to it. Okay, so we're getting closer to putting things together, so the excitement level is rising. We can go ahead and start cutting down these like parts that fit between the legs. So like for instance, here we have this back panel. In the front end of that, we have this wave rail here. And again, you know, these wave rails that were cut out on the CNC, wherever they end up, they're going to be really close to what they should be, at least they should be anyway. You're going to match this dimension when you cut down this panel here to here, and the rail that goes down below the drawers. And then the same thing here, where that pencil drawer is, we have that this wave rail. This dimension stays the same. This is going to get broken out of this here, going to be cut free, trimmed free, and then you will match this distance to this and to this. And then we've got another. I put all these in piles so I know to cut them all at the same time. You need the drawing to go through the drawing to determine which ones get cut at the same time, or you can kind of look at the cut list, and that should give you a clue too. So all those panels that go from the front to the back, like this is the ones that wrap around the drawer, and then there's a rail on the end and an upper rail on the end. That's in another pile. They're going to get cut all to the same length as well. So go ahead and cut all these down to the exact length. First trim these guys down to take off the material from coming off the CNC machine. And after that, we'll start putting some mortises in these guys, and then we can start doing some sub-assemblies. So we're on to the wave rails. This is a fixture for the multi-router. You can see that I've got little pieces I put on the ends here. That kind of helps me register it when I put it into the multi-router. I can put it in here and run it right up to those stops. You can also see that I've written here some numbers. This is the number that I'm going to set the multi-router bit, the bottom of the bit, up from the bed. I've zeroed the bit out on the bed and then ran it up like on, well, I have this one set right now, 2.378. And there's another number here, 0.280. That's the number. Once I get this routed, I'm going to take this off, put the calipers in there, and measure to see if it's 0.280. There's a lot of places where you can get off. You know, a few thousandths here and a few thousandths there actually add up to something in the end if you keep going off the same direction. So before you use these guys, I would take a pair of calipers, measure this distance here, and then this distance down here, and compare that to what's in the drawing. You know, make sure you're off. And if these are off, adjust accordingly. And then before I just use a block of wood to set that height, the distance up from the bed. Test that, get that right. And then I set this guy in here. Oops. Yeah, there we are. And I had the distance back and forth this way marked on here, and I set the stops accordingly, right up to the line. That distance back and forth this way isn't as critical as the height. The height is very critical. I really try to get within 3 thousandths of that height, and that 3 thousandths should keep you in good shape. So let's go ahead and route the first one. Okay, 276, about 4 thousandths off. I'm going to let that go. That's close enough. So then I'll keep going. I'll go through this whole process, the other end of this one, and both ends of the long guy. So one little note before we move on to the veneered panels. I should have mentioned this earlier. This is that rail that goes out on the last pair of legs right before we have that rule joint and the top flipping up. On the side with the wave rail, the front, the mortise here is split, so that wave rail can put a mortise in that leg in between there. The other side, the back side, the mortise goes all the way through. So now I like to use S6 biscuits. You may have a stash of them, I don't know, or you may have a source. I cannot find them anymore. I have a lifetime supply of them for myself because I like them. A lot more glue surface. I'm going to use those to attach the panel to the legs. If you can't get a hold of S6s, the S20 or just the number 20s will work. Just use maybe a few more of them. I've used 5 of the S6s on here. Now, the panel sits back proud, or the leg sits proud of the panel, 3/16 back, and that's proud of this highest point right here. This is that rail that sticks out proud of the panel itself. In order to do that, I'm referencing off the back side of the leg. And if you do the math and everything was the right size, that gives you a 5/8 offset from the back. Will produce on the front 3/16. That 3/16 isn't super critical, but you want to be fairly close. And the way I achieve that offset is with my lamella machine. I have two different blocks here. I set one that'll put me about the center of the panel, and then I have another block that is 5/16 thicker. I'll reset the fence, and then I'll do the legs. Now, it's really easy to get turned around when you have legs going and put a biscuit hole in the wrong spot. So just take your time. I'm going to do all the panels first and then come back and do the legs one at a time, and probably make sure that the next set of biscuits holes that I put in are in the right place. So let's get started.